And now, as we await more results from the Election Collation Center in Abuja, the People's Democratic Party, PDP, and the Labour Party and Action Alliance and others have called for the cancellation of the presidential elections in Ekiti State, citing alleged overvoting. The State Collation Officer for Ekiti State, Professor Akim Lasisi, earlier declared Bola Tinubu of the All Progressive Congress, APC, as the winner of the elections in Ekiti. The PDP agent and others staged a walkout during the collation of results yesterday, citing irregularities on the part of INEC. Now, according to him, Tinubu polled 201,494 votes to defeat Atiku Abubakar of the People's Democratic Party with 89,554 votes, and Labour Party's candidate Peter Obi, who gathered 11,397 votes, and of course Rabiu Musa Kwankwaso of the New Nigerian People's Party, who polled 264 votes. Let's quickly have you watch how it played out yesterday.
It worked in Osun. It must work in this presidential election. We cannot proceed with computation or collation of results when we cannot see. The confidence we have in this electoral act is the introduction of the electronic transmission of results. If that is not done, then there is no difference between what we are doing now and what we did in 2015, because what you are doing is practical manual collation. That means the billions of taxpayers' money, including mine, that was spent on the issue of beavers and transmission of electronic results is wasted.
But we want to tell you that we will not allow, having suffered a pain in this country, having suffered poverty, hunger, kidnapping, killings, we will not allow a continuation of failure. We must make sure that the right thing is done. And National Chairman is putting his integrity on test. We are putting his integrity on test. Nigerians are watching. The world is watching. Even the dead.
Well, of course, that is former Senator Dino Melai of the PDP. He is, of course, a party agent for the PDP, expressing the PDP's views concerning the collation of results. Now, let's bring in political analyst Victoria Ibezim Oheri. She's the director, Spaces for Change. Thanks for joining us, and good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. Now, let's quickly get your reactions to, of course, let's first of all start your reactions with what Dino Melai expressed there, of course, along with the Labour Party candidate. We'll probably also play a video clip from Ireti Kingibe. These are persons who say that the whole process, seems very fraudulent, and they do not agree with the way that it is playing out. What are your reactions to that, first of all?
So I think what Dino Melai, he was full of emotion, and but removing the emotion to focus on what he said, I think he raised a lot of important issues.
Okay, and these issues, you expect that INEC will, address them as quickly as possible?
Yes, he raised a lot of important issues, and the primary issue he was raising is the issue of conducting the election in contravention of the electoral laws, particularly the new Electoral Act of 2022 and the subsidiary legislation, which is the regulations and the guidelines on the conduct of elections for 2023. The particular section that he was referencing, I think that is section 60 sub 5 of the Electoral Act. And I think if you also look at paragraph 38 of the regulations and the guideline for the conduct of elections, which requires presiding officers to transmit results to the INEC result viewing portal on the completion of election. And across the country, there has not been substantial compliance with that legal requirement. And the law says that non-compliance with that any provision of the Electoral Act gives legal ground to any party to contest the elections. And that is what many Nigerians have been, have been very, very, very concerned about. Concerned that there were hopes were raised that the new voter accreditation technology will enhance transparency and credibility and integrity of the electoral process, because it will allow citizens to follow the collation of results from the polling unit up to the INEC portal to the collation point and point of declaration of result. But that has not happened. And I think that has made a lot of people that initially had hopes and confidence in that technology to think that something has gone wrong and that the elections fell short of expectations.
Yeah, well, it might be easy for people to think that way. Of course, I'm sure if you've been social media active, you must have seen a lot of these video clips and a lot of pictures showing that there's one issue or the other with election sheets or result sheets being tampered with in many places. I mean, definitely not all over the country, but from the ones that we've seen, there's too many of them to be ignored. And so what would you expect, from the Independent National Electoral Commission at a time like this? People have said that Professor Mahmoud Yakubu, failed, to, of course, assure Nigerians that this was a free, fair, and credible process. And, disappointed, basically, Nigerians, even after receiving 300, or allegedly was, approved 305 billion naira for the elections. Do you think that there is any faith across the country in the whole process as it stands?
There are mechanisms for redressing some of this, and most of them are contained in the Electoral Act. A lot of people have called on INEC, from the past former president to a lot of election observers. They've outlined numerous recommendations. Some are asking for cancellation of results in those areas where irregularities have been noticed, and in those states where outright voter manipulation that were incidented. And there seem to be some states with very high incidence records of those types of irregularities. So there are calls for cancellation in those areas. There are also calls for cancellation of the turnout election. There are also suggestions that those that are aggrieved in the end would go to will use the courts to allow the courts to evaluate the transparency or the overall conduct of the election and make a determination one way or the other. So these are different opportunities, different avenues. And if you look at some of the political parties, they started collecting evidence. Yesterday, some of them were asking citizens to upload their results, a partisan link. Some people have really started gathering all of the arsenals that they need to test it out, either in the court of law or using all the various mechanisms outlined in the electoral laws and the national constitution. So it is up to them. If INEC fails to correct and heed all of the recommendations that have been passed down to them in the last few days.
Well, we'll see how that goes. I also got to see election observers from the EU also state that the election, had, a lot of issues. There was marred with some level of violence here and there, and of course, irregularities with the process. What are your thoughts concerning that, and of course, the involvement of the international community watching this play out in Nigeria? Quickly.
It's not only the EU. Even long before the EU issued their statement, there were lots of statements, even from the National Human Rights Commission, from the Election Civil Society Situation Room, all lamenting about the, poor showing, our next poor outing at the polls on Saturday. So if you look at the uniformity of opinion from all of these, findings, it shows that something really went wrong, and is a call on INEC to really review what they have done on Saturday and see how they can begin to ensure that the outcome reflects the will of Nigerians. INEC still has time to do that. So maybe they're just waiting to finish the coalition. We don't know what their intentions are, but obviously Nigerians out there are not happy with what has happened. It is not just the irregularities. I think that the failure of the voter accreditation technology, which is the BVAS, the failure of that technology gave rise for a lot of other things, a lot of other atrocities that we are seeing around the electoral season. So I think the honor still rests on INEC to do the right thing.
All right, brilliant. We're going to move to talking about, one of the most shocking parts of this whole, process. That is the Labour Party winning Lagos. But I want you to quickly react to something before we get into that. This is a tweet by a guy, a lawyer, Inibehe F. Young. He says here, nothing about our electoral process is more painful to me as a lawyer The unseen election riggers, INEC and security agencies taunting aggrieved candidates and parties to go to court. They are indirectly saying something about our judiciary. So I want you to quickly share your views as a Nigerian and, of course, as a, an analyst. When people say, there's legal processes for settling these issues or for, seeking redress, in today's Nigeria, do you think that that should be comforting in any way for these persons who have been aggrieved, the likes of Ireti Kingibe and Dino Malai and, any other person who might feel aggrieved by the process?
I think what is informing some of these sentiments is the popular saying that a win is a win. So getting a win by all means necessary is the ultimate goal. And secondly, most of the people saying that know that in the last 8 years or so, the public confidence in the judiciary has waned significantly with what happened during the last elections, with the way the judiciary judicial independence was also undermined, and people are increasingly losing in confidence in the capability of the judiciary to evaluate processes and reach conclusions. We have also seen the judiciary hand out, decisions that shocked the electorate, that seemed to have upturned the majority, the view of the majority of those who cast their votes. I think that happened in some states, Imo State to be precise. So many of those things are making people uninterested in looking at the legal angle because of certain precedents that have been set in the past. The judiciary did not reach conclusions that aligned with the will of the people. And that is also a very sad reality. But the Constitution remains supreme. The Constitution simply has said that the judiciary remains the independent arbiter of such infractions. So we have no other alternative, we have no other mechanisms than to look up to the judiciary. So after this whole process, every time and again, if you look at our history of Nigerian elections, most matters have always ended up in the judiciary. So we have no other mechanism higher and bigger than the judiciary. So this is also a clarion call. What is happening at the moment is also a clarion call on judiciary to arise and step in and do the needful.
Yeah, I'm sure that also would include those who are signing petitions for the United States and other nations to give visa bans to people who are committing electoral fraud in Nigeria. I did say this yesterday that I believe that strengthening of our electoral laws and strengthening of our criminal justice system might be a much better idea because visa bans may not really solve the issues that we're facing. But
people are resorting to visa bans is also an expression of that erosion of confidence in the judiciary, because they feel that judicial decisions may not still give them the outcomes that they want. So they are looking for every avenue that they can use to extract some of punishment for those who violate electoral laws. So that is what you see playing out there on the social media and on the streets.
All right, now let's move away from the legal and INEC parts of it. Let's talk about Lagos State in particular. It may have come as a shock to many, but at the same time, certain people were confident enough that this was going to happen, and that is the Labour Party's candidate, former governor of Anambra State, Peter Obi, winning Lagos State. Of course, a state that also had Bola Ahmed Tinubu contesting. Shocking, surprising, maybe expected. Which of them was it for you? Oh, just before you respond, let's quickly share. Just before you respond, let's quickly share with our viewers a short clip from how that played out.
572-606. 572-606. LP 582454. 582454. PDP 75750. 75750. Total valid votes 1271451. 1271451.
All right, now let's get your view on Lagos State in particular. Did you see this coming?
Well, I don't think it was a shock. I actually expected a wider margin. And if you look at the sentiment on the streets, whether on the online streets, on the offline, many people still believe that the margin was even wider than what was declared, by that officer on the screen. So did it come at a surprise? No. And why should it not be a surprise? Because if you reflect on the last 8 years, Nigerians have had a nightmarish experience. Is it NSAS? Is it petrol hikes? Is it ASU strike, where students spent such longest time ever at home, losing academic periods, losing periods of employment? We are having the highest record levels of inflation, highest record levels of unemployment, highest record levels of poverty. Nigeria even overtook many countries of the world as the poverty capital of the world. So many indicators to show that Nigerians have really had it so bad, so very bad. So how do people translate that anger? How do they express that anger? How do they communicate that anger to that same political party that have unleashed that sort of difficulty on them? It is through the polls, usually through the ballot. So that is what Nigerians have done. And that is probably why we saw the resort of violence and use of thuggery to intimidate people from expressing their feelings towards the government. So that was just simply what happened. It had nothing to do with tribe. It had nothing to do with religion. It had nothing to do with anything whatsoever except the anger of the majority of citizens against the government.
If you say that the margin, or you expected the margin to be a lot wider, are you then stating that there's something that must have gone wrong there? And then also, what does that mean if Bola Ahmed Tinubu loses his own state? What does that mean in the bigger picture? Like, where else would he have been expected to win? And if he cannot win his own state, what does that say?
What it simply says is that elections, Nigeria is, particularly Lagos is a unique state. Lagos is not like other states of the Federation. Lagos is the melting point, the cultural melting point of the country, where you see different ethnic groups, where you see, a multicultural society where different people live together harmoniously, and it's not a place where you say this is just my own. It is a place where many Nigerians find unity, find a home, and a family, find it easier and happy to interact with. Like I said before, what happened during the polls is just expression of collective anger. People are tired of the party and the kind of policies, the kind of programs that the government, the party in the ruling party, rolled out, and the kind of outcomes that they produce. That was simply what Nigerians were doing, what Nigerians did last Saturday. It had nothing to do with Bola Ahmed Tinubu coming from Lagos or Lagos being his stronghold. Lagos is the former federal capital of Nigeria. This is, as a former federal capital, like Abuja is now the federal capital, it attracts all sorts of people. So anywhere that attracts all sorts of people, they have that sense of belonging in that area, and they identify in that area, they pay taxes in that area, they invest in that area. So it is no longer a place where you say this is just my own alone. So anybody that holds himself as a leader in that kind of cosmopolitan society needs to conduct his or her affairs in ways that meet the needs of generality and plurality of citizens that dwell in that area. So the question is whether he has done that. If he has not done that, maybe that could be why some of the results, turned out the way that they did.
All right. Let's also share with our viewers this morning what the election results currently look like, and then we will briefly discuss Kwara. Of course, the APC and APC currently has one Kwara state. We'll talk about that. But this is what the results currently look like. This is where we stand with the APC's candidate, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, 4.6 plus million votes. Atiku Abubakar with 3.1 million votes. And of course, Peter Obi, 1.6 plus million votes. Rabiu Kwankwaso with 1.2 million votes plus. And these, are the figures at this time. And of course, it's spread across different states of the country. Now, let's talk about Kwara in particular. We're going to move to the southeast in a bit, I think, after this. But I want you to speak on Kwara State. Many people say that Kwara is a deciding state, and anybody who wins Kwara most times eventually gets to win the presidency or win the election. Do you agree with that, and do you think that it's likely to play out in this time, as of course the APC has currently won Kwara State?
Well, I think what I said about Lagos also applies to Nigeria, applies to Kwara. During the last 8 years, where we had the worst experience ever in the history of this country in terms of the level of difficulty, the level of inflation that happened in this country. It did not happen in Kwara alone. It did not happen in Lagos alone. All across the country, people felt the same way. What politicians have tried to do is even some of the fine arrangements that INEC made, because prior to this process, apart from the BVAS technology that everybody had high confidence in that will eradicate some of the sharp practices introduced always or constantly introduced by politicians, but the BVAS failed to do that. So the politicians had to resort to the other underhand tactics that they have been using before, because what we are seeing now is no different from the manual collation of voting that Nigeria has always practiced. The BVAS technology did not make any difference. So what has happened in Kwara is consistent is what is happening in many locations where we saw voter intimidation, voter suppression, where certain parties felt they were not winning and they had to find ways to frustrate the process. So even as we blame INEC, there are also other factors that are playing out and resulting in victories and losses in different parts of the country. So I think the experiences of Nigerians have been the same in Kwara, in Lagos, in the east, in the north, in the south. But despite all that has happened, there is need for INEC to review a lot of things that have happened in different parts of the country,
all right, now
including Kwara State.
Let's take the conversation now to the southeastern part of Nigeria. Governor of Enugu State, Ifeanyi Ugwuanyi, of course, attempting to go to the Senate, but apparently has lost that bid. Same thing with Governor Ben Ayade. So I want to get your reactions to that. Enugu people have spoken. Is their voice loud enough in this time?
Very loud, of course, very loud. And I think that of Emeka Ugwuanyi was expected, because before Ugwuanyi, they had Sullivan. And if you go to Enugu at every point in time, there seemed to have been a wall of difference between the experience they had under Sullivan and the experience they were having under Ugwuanyi. It looked like there was a rollback on the developmental progress that the state witnessed in the previous administration. And citizens expected even more than the previous administration. But the rollbacks angered a lot of people. People couldn't wait for the ballot, for the polls to come, so that they can send a message back to the governor that everything that he did, his style of governance, the outcomes of his governance fell short of the expectation, and that was simply what happened. And secondly is the Labour Party effect. The Labour Party effect, I think the character and the personality of the presidential candidate of the Labour Party had that effect on a lot of people that ran on the platform of the Labour Party, especially for the National Assembly elections. And we saw how that trickled down to all of those people that ran on that platform. They benefited from that charismatic effect. They benefited from that belief that popularity of views had in that presidential candidate, that he will give them the kind of government that they wanted, that they desired. And those sentiments were really loud in the southeastern part of the country. Those are some of the things that probably translated in what we saw in Ugwuanyi's loss.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, now let's move away from the southeast and Cross River State also. Former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo has advised President Muhammadu Buhari to take urgent steps to address the concerns raised over the alleged discrepancies regarding the results of the general elections. There have also been concerns and protests on and off social media platforms over attacks at polling units, non-functionality of the BVAS system, missing results on the Independent National Electoral Commission result viewing portal, among other incidents recorded. In his letter, Obasanjo said Buhari cannot afford to ignore the concerns raised over the electoral process, adding that immediate steps, including rescheduling of the polls in affected areas, need to be taken. I think we can quickly also just get a quick clip of the former president here.
To speak at this point. And I crave the indulgence of the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, His Excellency General Muhammadu Buhari, to make this statement because I've had opportunity to keep him aware of what I know is happening and the danger looming ahead. On many occasions in the past, I have not hesitated to point out lacuna in the action of the president and his government. But as far as the election issues that we are now facing are concerned, the president has proved beyond reasonable doubt that he will want to leave a legacy of free, fair, transparent, and credible elections.
Well, this hasn't, come without its own fair share of criticism. There's people who have also asked him to step us up, to stay out of the conversations concerning rigging elections. Victoria Ibezim, let's get your thoughts on this one quickly.
Yeah, of course, it is not about whether he too had, had been guilty of the same offenses before or not. But the issue is we have to focus on the issues he has raised. And a lot of people agree with him that the affected areas, the discrepancies in the affected areas need to be corrected. And that is a legitimate demand to make. And what Obasanjo is doing right now, you should remember that Obasanjo has continued to follow this path. Even when Jonathan was president, every time something was wrong in the polity, he has always written letters, he has always expressed his, his position on issues. So he is a Nigerian citizen and he has the right to also communicate his thoughts to the presidency. And as a former president, it sits within his rights to do that. And that is what he has done. But looking at the issues he has raised, I think he is making a call, and the same call that Nigerians are making on INEC, to correct some of these wrongs that have been outrightly detected. There have been calls about many people took pictures of their polling unit results, and what they have seen up there on the portal is inconsistent with what they have, the records that they have. We have seen badly altered election, collected figures, word collations. We have seen people uploading personal images in place of EC8A forms. We have seen different types of irregularities. There was a particular state that the date of it was uploaded is inconsistent with the date the results were declared. So all of these irregularities, they demand answers. It's not just enough to say we are taking steps, we will do everything necessary to ensure. All of those are just aspirations. We have to move from aspirations to real action. And that is what Obasanjo is demanding. And what is demanding is also in alignment with what the EU, a lot of election observer groups are demanding, asking for correction of all of their irregularities and anomalies. It's not just enough to wait for the courts to do this, because if we wait for the courts to do this, it's going to come at a very great expense. Assuming the courts order a total cancellation, where will Nigeria get another 300 and something billion to conduct another election? Is it the same country that is drowning in debt, in a debt crisis? Are we going to borrow more money to conduct another presidential election? So I think it's cheaper and safer for the country to let INEC correct some of these wrongs that have been flagged. All
right. Victoria Ibezim, thank you so much for your time this morning. I truly enjoyed the conversation with you. And we hope that, every other person is listening, the persons who, should play an active role in ensuring that Nigeria remains in peace, and these persons who have been aggrieved also are comforted. We will be bringing you again as quickly as possible to have more of these conversations.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.